It began quietly, with the faint sound of paper sliding through the mail slot and landing on the hardwood floor. The day was ordinary in every other way. The low hum of a distant lawnmower, the afternoon sun stretching shadows across the porch, and the smell of freshly cut grass drifting in from next door. But that envelope, glossy white, with a sharp black HOA insignia stamped in the corner, had a weight far beyond its size. The Homeowners Association in Maple Grove was known for its obsession with appearances. Residents joked that the grass had to be exactly 2.5 inches tall and the shades drawn at a 45-degree angle. But in reality, the HOA's rules were a tangled web of vague community guidelines that could be interpreted however the board liked. And lately the board had been interpreting them in increasingly aggressive ways. Inside the envelope was a single-page letter printed in bold, formal language. At the top, in crimson ink, were the words "Violation Notice." The offense was brief but shocking. Improper flag display, violation of community, aesthetic standards. Beneath that, a paragraph explaining that the freestanding flagpole installed on the front lawn was not in compliance with approved neighborhood design principles and must be removed within 14 days to avoid fines. The words seemed to tighten the air in the room. That flagpole had been planted firmly in the soil last summer, a sturdy, gleaming aluminum pole with a stainless steel cleat, rising 30 feet into the air. At its peak, the American flag moved with the wind, casting ripples of red, white, and blue against the sky. It was more than a decoration. It was a statement, a symbol of pride, service, and history. Removing it felt unthinkable. The HOA's letter claimed the pole disrupted visual uniformity, as if the presence of the flag itself somehow shattered the carefully curated monotony of beige siding and identical shrubs. Yet looking down the street, there were garden gnomes, flamingo statues, and seasonal inflatable turkeys, none of which seemed to have attracted the wrath of the board. The targeting felt deliberate. That evening, the notice was read over again and again, the sharp edges of its phrasing lingering in the mind like a splinter. The words "failure to comply" and "further legal action" were not just empty threats in Maple Grove. This HOA had a reputation for escalation. Residents who resisted found themselves buried under daily fines, liens on their property, or worse, subtle social pressure that turned neighbors into enforcers. The following days were filled with subtle but noticeable changes in the atmosphere. Neighbors who usually waved began avoiding eye contact. Conversations on the sidewalk grew hushed when footsteps approached. A couple of board members, recognizable in their crisp polo shirts with embroidered HOA logos, started making slow passes in their cars, glancing at the property with tight-lipped expressions. The flag itself seemed unaware of the brewing conflict. It continued to sway proudly in the breeze, catching the first light of dawn and the last glow of sunset. But the tension around it was building like a summer storm. On the 5th day after receiving the notice, a second envelope arrived, this one thicker with multiple pages. It was an official cease and desist order, accompanied by a schedule of escalating fines, starting at $100 per day, effective immediately after the 14-day deadline. The language had grown sharper, almost personal, accusing the homeowner of willfully disregarding community governance and acting in defiance of collectively agreed-upon standards. But there had been no collective agreement. The HOA board in Maple Grove operated behind closed doors, rarely putting matters to a community vote. Their standards shifted like sand, written in vague terms so they could be enforced selectively. And in this case, it was painfully clear that the flagpole was being singled out, not because it broke a rule, but because it stood for something the board didn't control. The next step wasn't immediate defiance. Instead, there was a careful gathering of information, pulling copies of the HOA's bylaws, combing through state property statutes, and researching federal laws on flag display. It became clear quickly, in this state, an HOA could not prohibit a homeowner from displaying the U.S. flag. They could regulate certain aspects, like size or placement, but outright banning a flagpole in the front yard was a legal overreach. That discovery brought a measure of calm, but also a sharper sense of what was really happening. This wasn't about aesthetics at all. This was about authority. The HOA wanted control, and the flagpole, standing tall, unapproved, and unapologetic, was a challenge to that control. The days slipped past toward the deadline, each one marked by new signs of pressure. A neighbor 2 doors down mentioned, in a strained whisper, that the board had brought up the flag in their last meeting, calling it divisive and provocative. Another neighbor, who once admired the flag's height, now avoided the property altogether. The isolation was growing. On the 12th day, a letter arrived from the HOA's attorney, thick with legal jargon but clear in its intent. Remove the flagpole or face immediate court action. It was accompanied by an aerial photograph of the property, zoomed in to highlight the pole's base like it was evidence in a criminal case. The line had been drawn. Removing the flagpole was not an option, but ignoring the HOA's demands entirely would invite a legal battle that could spiral quickly. It was time for a different kind of move, one that would take the fight out of the board's secret meetings and into the public eye. The plan began with a phone call to City Hall, not to a clerk or a mid-level official, but directly to the mayor's office. The issue was explained simply. The HOA was attempting to ban the display of the national flag, in clear violation of both state and federal protections. There was no request for special treatment, only a hope that the mayor would be aware of what was happening in his own community. Surprisingly, the response came within hours. The mayor's office confirmed awareness of Maple Grove's aggressive HOA activity and expressed deep concern about the flag incident. They asked for documentation, the notices, the letters, the photographs, and promised to review the matter immediately. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the flag caught the last warm light, a new kind of anticipation filled the air. The fight was no longer just between one homeowner and a board of self-appointed enforcers. There were bigger eyes on Maple Grove now. By the next morning, whispers were moving through the neighborhood again. But this time, they carried a different tone. Someone had spotted a city vehicle near the entrance to the subdivision. Someone else claimed to have seen a news van parked at the corner. The HOA president's car was in the driveway all day, blinds drawn, as if preparing for something. And then late that afternoon, a black SUV with city plates rolled slowly down the street and stopped in front of the property. The driver's door opened, and the mayor himself stepped out. He stood at the edge of the yard for a long moment, looking up at the flag as it rippled against a clear blue sky. The sound of it, the steady snap of fabric in the breeze, seemed to fill the silence. The moment was about to become something far larger than anyone in Maple Grove could have predicted. Chapter 2, The Mayor's Stand. The mayor didn't rush. He stood there for several seconds, his gaze fixed on the flag as if he were studying something more than just fabric. There was a weight to the way he held himself. Hands clasped loosely behind his back, head tilted slightly upward, that made the entire street slow down. Conversations faded, doors cracked open, blinds shifted ever so slightly. Maple Grove was a place where news spread faster than the wind, and now everyone was watching. The HOA president emerged from her home 3 doors down, the click of her sandals sharp against the pavement. She carried a clipboard, the symbol of her authority, clutched tightly to her chest. Her expression was stiff, a practiced blend of concern and superiority. She approached the mayor with quick, deliberate steps, saying nothing loud enough to be heard from the yard. The mayor listened, nodding occasionally, though his eyes never left the flagpole. The president gestured toward it, her voice rising slightly, the tone sharpened by a mix of frustration and defensiveness. This was her turf, her rules, and the sudden intrusion of city government threatened that control. From inside the house, the documents were ready. Every letter, every photograph, every dated envelope laid neatly in a folder. When the mayor finally turned toward the porch, his expression shifted to something firm and resolute. The HOA president followed, her pace quickening, as if trying to keep the conversation private. But privacy had left Maple Grove the moment that black SUV rolled down the street. By the time the mayor stepped onto the lawn, 2 more cars had slowed to watch. A pair of teenagers leaned against their bikes at the corner, and a dog walker paused mid-stride. The scene was gathering an audience. The quiet suburban order of Maple Grove, disrupted by an event no one could have scripted. The folder of documents changed hands. The mayor flipped through the first few pages, eyes scanning the legal threats and violation notices. He didn't need long to understand the situation. His jaw tightened slightly as he turned to the flag again, the afternoon sun catching the edge of his suit jacket. There was something about the moment, the flag, the mayor, the quiet tension, that felt bigger than the neighborhood itself. It was no longer about a simple HOA dispute. It was about the idea that a group of residents, acting under the banner of aesthetics, could decide which symbols were allowed to stand and which must be torn down. Chapter 3, Cameras Rolling. The rumble of the news van's engine carried over the low hum of neighborhood air conditioners. As it came to a stop, the side door slid open and two people stepped out, a cameraman in a faded ball cap and a reporter, balancing a microphone, notepad, and phone all at once. They were quick, practiced in the art of arriving before anyone could object, and they didn't ask before filming. The HOA president's face paled just enough for it to be noticeable. Public attention was the one thing she couldn't control. Inside the HOA's tightly run meetings, she held absolute power, but here, in the open, with the lens of a camera aimed directly at her, every word could be replayed, analyzed, and picked apart. The mayor seemed to understand the significance immediately. He didn't flinch at the cameras. In fact, he adjusted his posture, standing square to the flag as though the scene itself was a statement worth preserving. His eyes lingered on the pole's base, tracing the bolts sunk deep into the soil, the clean shine of the aluminum. He took in the details as the camera zoomed in, the flag's edge snapping sharply in the breeze. The reporter moved closer, her voice pitched just enough for the microphone to catch over the wind. The HOA president stepped slightly in front of her, clipboard rising like a shield. It was an attempt to take control of the narrative before it could spiral. But the mayor didn't step back. Neighbors emerged in small waves now. A man from across the street with a coffee mug in hand. A young mother with a stroller, keeping to the sidewalk but slowing to watch. Groups formed quietly, whispering to each other, scanning between the mayor, the reporter, and the flag. From a distance, the scene had the strange calm of a standoff. Though no one was shouting, no one was moving aggressively. The tension lay in the stillness. In the way both the mayor and the HOA president seemed rooted in place, neither willing to step down first. The cameraman began capturing the documents the mayor had been holding. The HOA letters, with their bold violation stamps and thick legal phrasing, appeared on screen, crisp and unfiltered. The camera lingered on phrases like failure to comply and subject to legal action. The fine amounts, the deadlines, the aerial photos, nothing was softened. A low murmur moved through the crowd. For many of these neighbors, it was the first time they had seen the actual paperwork, the exact language the HOA used behind closed doors. The president's polished image, as a fair and orderly leader, began to crack in real time. The mayor turned, briefly addressing the cameraman, not speaking to the reporter's questions yet, but making sure every angle of the flagpole was documented. He inspected the lawn around it, noting the absence of any obstruction, any hazard, any genuine violation. The pole was clean, straight, and clearly maintained. Then came the first unmistakable shift. The mayor began walking toward the pole itself. The cameraman followed closely, the lens catching every step. The HOA president's protests rose behind him, sharper now, the rhythm of someone realizing they were losing control. The mayor reached the base of the flagpole and examined the halyard rope. It was well kept, the cleat tied neatly, the nylon unfrayed. Above, the flag moved easily, catching the late-day sun in bright, saturated colors. For a moment, the mayor simply stood there looking up, letting the sound of the wind and fabric speak for itself. Across the street, someone pulled out a phone and began live-streaming the scene. Within minutes, more people joined in. Different angles, different captions. Screens lit up as friends outside the neighborhood tuned in, leaving strings of comments. The mayor turned back toward the reporter, finally speaking in measured, deliberate tones that carried enough to be heard by those closest. His words weren't heated. They were calm, clear, and grounded in law, explaining state protections, federal statutes, and the rights of homeowners to display the national flag. The reporter scribbled quickly, though the camera didn't need her notes. Every word was being captured. The HOA president, for the first time, took a small step back. It was barely noticeable, but the subtle retreat signaled a shift in power. The mayor's stance, the cameras, the crowd, all of it was pressing in on the board's authority. And then, as if the moment had been scripted, the mayor reached for the halyard and lowered the flag halfway, his movements deliberate and precise. The crowd quieted, unsure of what was about to happen. He checked the flag's edge for wear, smoothed the fabric briefly, then began raising it again, hand over hand, pulling the line until the flag was back at full mast. The cameras caught the moment perfectly, the flag rising against a clear sky, the sunlight hitting it just as it reached the top. It wasn't just symbolic, it was a direct, visible statement of defiance against the HOA's demand. The HOA president didn't speak. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the clipboard now hanging limply at her side. The neighbors were no longer just watching. Some were quietly nodding, others murmuring in approval. A few even clapped softly. The mayor stepped back, dusted his hands lightly, and stood with the flag at his back. He didn't need to say much more. The image itself, recorded from multiple angles, was enough to carry the story beyond Maple Grove. The news crew gathered their final shots, capturing the mayor walking back toward his SUV, while the flag waved steadily above. The crowd began to break apart, though not entirely. Groups lingered, discussing what they'd just witnessed, speculating on what the HOA would do next. The president turned sharply and walked back to her home, her sandals clicking quickly against the pavement. The door shut harder than necessary. Curtains shifted as she disappeared inside. Within an hour, clips of the mayor raising the flag were circulating online. Local accounts shared them first, but soon they were picked up by regional pages. The hashtags grew quickly. Ma flag fight, Maple Grove, Mayor vs HOA. By nightfall, the neighborhood's quiet streets were lit by the soft glow of phone screens as residents scrolled through comments, news articles, and videos. For once, the HOA wasn't controlling the narrative. The story had left their hands entirely, but the board wasn't finished. Behind closed doors, they were already drafting their next move, one that would take the fight from the front yard to the courtroom. Chapter 4, Retaliation. The quiet that settled over Maple Grove after the mayor's visit was thin and brittle, like glass waiting to be shattered. The flag still flew high, unchanged, but beneath its calm movement there was a shift in the air, a sense that something was coming. For 2 days, the HOA board remained silent. No new letters, no phone calls, no knocks on the door. But in Maple Grove, silence was rarely a sign of surrender. It was a sign of preparation. On the third morning, the mail carrier approached with a stack of envelopes, pausing briefly at the edge of the property. The top envelope was thicker than any before, sealed with the HOA's embossed crest. Inside, the letterhead was different, no longer the casual violation notice style, but a formal legal document drafted by a law firm based downtown. The language was colder now, stripped of the HOA's usual neighborly veneer. It accused the homeowner of flagrant non-compliance, public defamation of the association, and fostering a hostile community environment through unauthorized media engagement. The fines had escalated to $500 per day, retroactive to the original 14-day deadline. In bold at the bottom, intent to file suit. The letter was not signed by the HOA president. Instead, it bore the name of an attorney specializing in property disputes. This was no longer just a neighborhood quarrel. It was an official legal escalation. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had stayed neutral began to pick sides, their quiet nods or avoidance more pronounced. Those supportive of the flag spoke in low voices near the mailbox, careful not to be overheard. Those siding with the HOA kept their blinds drawn, their front yards meticulously groomed, as if signaling their loyalty through compliance. The news outlets caught wind of the new development almost immediately. What had started as a local interest segment was now a story with legs, the kind that fit neatly into larger debates about property rights, patriotism, and the limits of HOA authority. By the end of the week, a follow-up broadcast aired. The footage from the mayor's visit played, alongside an interview with a retired judge who explained that in this state, the HOA's legal footing was questionable at best. He cited the same federal law the homeowner had already found, the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, making it clear that any attempt to remove the pole outright could be challenged in court. But the HOA was betting on more than legal strength. They knew the stress, time, and cost of a lawsuit could wear down even the most determined homeowner. They were playing a long game, one measured not just in rules but in endurance. The days ahead felt like a slow siege. Small things began happening that were never formally tied to the board, but which bore the unmistakable fingerprints of HOA politics. One morning, a city code enforcement officer appeared unannounced, citing a complaint about an overgrown hedge. The hedge in question was neatly trimmed. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the sanitation department about improper trash bin placement. Though the bins had been in the same spot for years, the pattern was obvious. If the board couldn't force the flag down directly, they would bury the property in petty infractions, each one another drain on time and energy. Still, the flag flew. The mayor, aware of the retaliation, made a quiet visit to City Hall's legal department, ensuring the homeowner had access to city council if needed. He did not make another public appearance in the neighborhood, perhaps wary of escalating tensions too quickly, but his office kept in contact. Meanwhile, the HOA president doubled down on her position. At the next closed-door board meeting, the minutes of which were leaked by a sympathetic resident, she described the flag as a deliberate act of rebellion and insisted that uniformity must be maintained at all costs. The phrase "at all costs" was underlined twice in the leaked document. The leak spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Copies of the minutes were slipped into mailboxes, passed quietly from hand to hand. For some residents, it was confirmation of what they had long suspected. The board's obsession with control outweighed any reasonable interpretation of the rules. For others, it was a rallying cry. The next weekend, 3 more houses on the same street raised, their own flagpoles, shorter than the original, but still visible from the road. Each one had a crisp American flag snapping in the wind by Sunday morning. The HOA's response was immediate. Violation notices appeared in all 3 mailboxes within 48 hours, citing unauthorized vertical structures. But the tone of those notices was less confident now, the legal language softened by an awareness that the fight was no longer one-on-one. The neighborhood had split into visible camps. On one side, front yards with flags, some on poles, some on wall mounts, creating a patchwork of red, white, and blue. On the other, homes conspicuously bare, their owners speaking in clipped tones, if at all. The online coverage amplified the divide. Social media posts framed Maple Grove as a flashpoint in the national debate over HOA authority. Some commenters praised the homeowner's stand as patriotic. Others called it an unnecessary disruption of community order. The story had moved beyond the control of anyone in the neighborhood, caught now in a wider current. Then came the official notice. The HOA had filed suit in county court, seeking a court order to remove the flagpole and pay accrued fines. The trial date was set for 6 weeks out. It was no longer a question of whether the fight would go public. It already was. The question now was whether it would end in a quiet courtroom or explode into something bigger, something neither side could contain. The flag, for its part, remained steady, its colors vivid under the summer sun. But the street below was no longer the same. Every glance from a passing car, every whisper over a backyard fence carried the weight of the conflict. And in the HOA president's house, lights burned late into the night, the glow of a computer screen marking the drafting of whatever came next. Chapter 5. The Courtroom Pressure. The courthouse was an old brick building, its steps worn from decades of legal battles, both petty and profound. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, the air outside was thick with August humidity, clinging to shirts and dampening collars. A few reporters stood near the entrance, their cameras resting on tripods, waiting for the case they'd been tracking for weeks to take its first formal step into the legal system. Inside, the courtroom carried the heavy stillness of expectation. The ceiling fans whirred softly, the air smelling faintly of polished wood and old paper. On one side of the aisle sat the HOA's legal team, 2 attorneys in sharp suits, their briefcases neatly placed by their chairs, their expressions set in stone. The HOA president sat with them, her clipboard replaced by a slim folder, her eyes scanning the room with a mixture of defiance and unease. On the other side sat the homeowner and a volunteer, legal advisor from the city's council office, arranged quietly with their own stack of documents. The mayor had not come in person, perhaps to avoid accusations of interference, but his office had made sure the right statutes, precedents, and case law were on hand. The judge entered with a practiced sweep of the robe, eyes moving over the room before settling into the chair. The case was called, the attorneys stood, and the formalities began. The HOA's opening statement was polished, rehearsed, and delivered with precision. The lead attorney described the flagpole as an unapproved vertical obstruction in violation of established community guidelines, framing the dispute as a simple matter of rule enforcement. They spoke of uniform visual harmony and the sanctity of collectively agreed-upon standards, painting the board as the guardian of order in a neighborhood under threat from individual noncompliance. But the city's council approached the lectern with a different weight to their voice. They cited the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, state property laws, and specific cases in which HOAs had been overruled for similar restrictions. They pointed out the absence of any recorded vote or amendment in the HOA bylaws, explicitly banning freestanding flagpoles. They described the fines and notices as unlawful intimidation designed to pressure compliance where no lawful authority existed. The judge listened without interruption, leaning forward slightly when federal protections were mentioned. The HOA attorneys shifted in their seats, their pens still but their posture rigid. The first hearing was not a trial but a setting of boundaries, a determination of what evidence could be introduced, what arguments would be permitted, and whether the case would move to a full trial or be dismissed outright. The judge set a trial date 3 weeks ahead, noting pointedly that both parties should be prepared to address the matter of federal preemption. Outside the courthouse, the waiting reporters pounced. The HOA president moved quickly to her car, head down, refusing to comment. The city's council, however, spoke briefly, confirming that they would vigorously defend the homeowner, his right to display the national flag. The clip made the evening news, paired with footage of the flag in Maple Grove swaying against a cloudless sky. The next 3 weeks became a kind of limbo. In the neighborhood, the tension was tangible. Cars slowed when passing the property, some honking in support, others passing in stiff silence. More houses had quietly added their own flags, small ones mounted to porches, larger ones hung from second-story windows. The HOA responded with more notices, but the volume of violations was becoming unmanageable. Behind the scenes, the board scrambled. They called emergency meetings, consulted with public relations firms, and tried to find legal precedents that would justify their position. But every path seemed to lead back to the same wall. Federal law was not on their side. Yet the HOA president was not ready to yield. She began crafting a new narrative, one that shifted the dispute away from the flag itself, and toward alleged secondary violations, claims of unkempt landscaping, improper lighting on the flagpole, and even noise complaints tied to the metal halyard clinking against the pole in the wind. The homeowner documented everything, every notice, every claimed infraction, every witness who could attest to the truth. The file grew thicker by the day, a detailed record of the board's relentless tactics. When the trial day arrived, the courtroom was fuller than before. Word had spread, and the case had drawn more public interest than the HOA anticipated. The first rows were taken by journalists, the rest by a mix of residents, supporters from outside the community, and curious onlookers who had followed the story online. The HOA attorneys opened again, but this time their confidence had a hairline crack. They tried to frame the matter as a dispute over structural consistency rather than patriotism. But the judge, already familiar with the filings, steered the discussion back to federal protections almost immediately. The homeowners' council presented the violation letters in chronological order, each one projected onto a screen. The words "failure to comply" and the escalating fine amounts drew audible murmurs from the gallery. Then came the leaked board meeting minutes, where the president had said uniformity must be maintained at all costs. The judge paused at that document, reading it twice before looking directly at the HOA president. The silence stretched for several seconds, the weight of the words hanging in the air. The HOA's attempt to shift the case toward landscaping and lighting violations was met with skepticism. The alleged infractions were minor, inconsistent, and in some cases unsupported by evidence. The judge noted the timing, each coming after the initial flag dispute, and questioned whether they were retaliatory in nature. By the end of the day, it was clear the trial was tilting in one direction. The HOA had not only failed to make a convincing case for removing the flagpole, but had also drawn attention to its pattern of targeted enforcement. The judge did not issue an immediate ruling. Instead, she set a final hearing for the following week, stating that she would review all evidence and address the matter in full. As the courtroom emptied, the HOA president's shoulders were stiff, her folder clutched tightly. The homeowner walked out to a small crowd of supporters gathered on the steps, the flag once again appearing on news broadcasts that night. The battle wasn't over. The final ruling would decide everything, but the momentum had shifted, and the HOA's grip on the neighborhood was starting to slip. Chapter 6. The Decision. The final hearing drew the largest crowd yet. By the time the courthouse doors opened that morning, a line had formed along the steps. Residents of Maple Grove, members of neighboring communities, veterans in neatly pressed caps, and curious onlookers who had followed the story online. News vans flanked both ends of the block, their antenna masts jutting into the overcast sky. Inside, the air felt heavier than before. Every seat in the gallery was filled, with people standing along the back wall, their expressions a mix of anticipation and quiet defiance. The HOA's legal team arrived early, their faces drawn, their conversations hushed. The president took her seat at the front, her jaw set so firmly it seemed carved from stone. The homeowner entered without ceremony, accompanied by the city's council. They carried the same thick binder of evidence, its edges worn from weeks of handling, but there was something different in their posture, a steadiness, as if the outcome was no longer a matter of fear but of inevitability. The judge took her seat promptly, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on the case file. She opened with a summary of the matter. The HOA's attempt to force the removal of a freestanding flagpole, the escalating fines, the alleged secondary violations, and the legal arguments presented by both sides. Then she began to read her findings. The court recognized the HOA's authority to establish reasonable aesthetic guidelines within the community, she said, but such authority could not override federal protections afforded to the display of the United States flag. The freedom to display. The American Flag Act was clear. Homeowners could not be prohibited from displaying the flag on their property, though minor regulations on placement and safety could be enforced. She noted that the HOA's bylaws did not contain any explicit prohibition on freestanding flagpoles at the time. The pole was installed. More importantly, the court found that the HOA's enforcement actions, including the sequence of escalating fines and the sudden emergence of unrelated violation notices, demonstrated a pattern of targeted retaliation rather than impartial rule enforcement. The secondary complaints, such as the alleged hedge overgrowth and trash bin placement, were dismissed outright as lacking credible evidence. The supposed noise complaint about the flag halyard was described as frivolous in the official record. The gallery was silent except for the faint scratch of the court clerk's pen as the judge continued. The ruling ordered the HOA to cease all enforcement actions related to the flagpole immediately, to remove all fines levied against the homeowner, and to reimburse any payments already made under those fines. Additionally, the HOA was instructed to cover the homeowner's legal costs. The judge's final remarks were pointed. She reminded the HOA of its duty to act in the genuine interest of the community, not to pursue personal grievances under the guise of uniformity. Authority, she said, is not a license for control beyond the scope of law. When the gavel fell, the sound was met with a low ripple of murmurs, quickly swelling into quiet applause from the gallery. It wasn't loud, the court still demanded decorum, but it carried the weight of weeks of tension breaking at once. The HOA president did not look up. She gathered her folder with brisk movements, stood, and left the courtroom without acknowledging anyone. Her attorneys followed, their expressions unreadable. Outside, the courthouse steps became a press conference without a podium. The homeowner spoke briefly, thanking the community members who had stood in support and reaffirming that the flag would continue to fly. The city's council underscored the significance of the ruling, noting that it set a clear example for other HOAs across the state. The crowd on the steps was larger than when the morning began. People who had never met before were shaking hands, exchanging smiles, and taking photos with the courthouse in the background. Veterans stood in small clusters, their caps catching the light, nodding in quiet approval. Back in Maple Grove, the ripple effect began almost immediately. Word of the decision reached the neighborhood before the homeowner even returned. A few residents stepped outside to raise their own flags, some of which had been stored away during the dispute. Others simply stood at the edge of their lawns, waiting to see the flag return to its usual place at full mast. By late afternoon, the street was lined with red, white, and blue, some flags large and bold, others modest but all visible. The HOA board remained conspicuously silent. No new emails, no urgent notices, no hastily called meetings. The president's blinds stayed closed for days, her once constant patrols through the neighborhood absent. The authority she had wielded so confidently was now fractured, the ruling casting a long shadow over the board's ability to enforce its will without scrutiny. In the weeks that followed, the story spread beyond state lines. National outlets picked it up, framing it as a cautionary tale for overreaching HOAs. Interviews were conducted, opinion pieces were written, and the footage of the mayor raising the flag replayed countless times across television and social media. But inside Maple Grove, life began to settle. Lawns were mowed, children played in the street, and neighbors once divided by the dispute began to find small ways to reconnect. The flagpole stood at the center of it all, unchanged and unyielding, a quiet reminder of the fight that had unfolded around it. Yet beneath the calm, there was an unspoken awareness that the battle had left marks on reputations, on relationships, and on the way the neighborhood understood power. For the homeowner, the end of the legal fight was not the end of the story. The flag's presence had become something more than personal pride. It was a visible marker of resistance, of a willingness to stand firm when authority crossed the line. And for the HOA, the ruling was not just a defeat. It was a warning. Chapter 7. The Flag Will Stay. The morning after the court's decision, Maple Grove woke to an unusual quiet. There was no shuffle of HOA board members pacing the sidewalks. No clipped notes slipped under doors. No sudden knocks reminding residents of community compliance. Instead, the neighborhood felt almost still. The flagpole stood as it had before the first complaint was ever filed. Tall, silver, and resolute. The flag at its peak caught the early light, each fold rippling gently in the morning breeze. For the first time in months, it was a sound without tension. The homeowner stepped outside, coffee in hand, and paused at the base of the pole. There was no ceremony, no announcement, just a moment to take in the reality that the fight was truly over. A long breath left their chest, as if the weight of every letter, meeting, and accusation had finally loosened its grip. By mid-morning, the mayor arrived, not in a convoy of city vehicles or surrounded by aides this time, but in a simple sedan wearing casual clothes. He stepped out with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove. The neighbors who happened to be outside greeted him warmly, some shaking his hand, others simply nodding in respect. He walked to the flagpole and looked up for a long moment. There was no speech, no press. He didn't need to raise the flag this time. It was already where it belonged. Instead, he placed his hand on the metal base for just a second, as though to affirm silently that it would stay there. Word spread quickly that the mayor was in the neighborhood again, and soon a small group had gathered. They didn't come with protest signs or cameras. This time, just quiet smiles and a shared sense that something important had been defended. The mayor exchanged a few words with the homeowner, then made his way down the street, stopping to speak with other residents before leaving as quietly as he had arrived. In the days that followed, the HOA board's presence diminished further. Notices became rare and carefully worded. The president no longer chaired meetings with the same air of absolute authority. Instead, minutes were posted without commentary, and decisions were made with more input from residents. It was as if the ruling had forced the entire structure to remember that it existed to serve the community, not to control it. Some residents who had once avoided the flag entirely now displayed their own, not as a political statement, but as a simple acknowledgement of what had happened. They didn't speak about the dispute directly, but there was a new undercurrent of solidarity, a quiet recognition that they had all witnessed the same test of principle. The national attention lingered for weeks, long enough for Maple Grove to become a reference point in discussions about HOA overreach. Commentators debated it on television, and online forums dissected the legal angles. The footage of the mayor raising the flag remained one of the most shared clips, though the court's ruling itself became the true turning point in public conversation. For the homeowner, life returned to its ordinary rhythms, mowing the lawn, checking the mail, waving to passing cars. But the awareness that the flag now carried a story was never far away. Visitors sometimes paused at the sight of the pole, recognizing it from the news. A few even took discreet photos from the sidewalk. Every so often, a letter would arrive from someone outside the state, a veteran, a fellow homeowner, or a stranger who had simply followed the case. They wrote about their own experiences with HOAs, their pride in their flags, or their gratitude for the fight that had been waged in such a visible way. These letters didn't pile up in boxes or get stored away. They were kept, read, and remembered. The HOA president, for her part, remained in the neighborhood but was rarely seen. Rumor had it she had considered resigning, though no official announcement came. Her once firm alliances on the board seemed fractured, and though she still held her title, her influence was muted. The other members appeared more cautious, more deliberate, as though they too had learned that unchecked authority could quickly turn against them. As the first anniversary of the dispute approached, the homeowner considered marking the date in some quiet way. No banners, no event, just a simple acknowledgement. On that morning, the flag was lowered at dawn, then raised again at full mast as the sun broke the horizon. No crowd gathered, yet a few neighbors emerged from their homes to watch. One of them, a retired serviceman who had rarely spoken during the entire ordeal, saluted as the fabric caught the wind. The homeowner returned the gesture with a nod. No words were exchanged, but none were needed. That evening, the sky turned the deep, saturated colors of summer, gold, crimson, and the first hints of blue-gray twilight. The flag's silhouette cut sharply against the light, its motion steady and unhurried. Cars passed, children played, and the neighborhood carried on. But the presence of that flagpole had subtly shifted the way. People saw their own homes, their own rules, and their own boundaries. In the end, it wasn't just about one homeowner's right to fly a flag. It was about the reminder that communities are built on shared respect, not enforced uniformity. That authority exists within limits. That sometimes standing your ground doesn't just change your own life. It changes the rules for everyone around you. Long after the cameras were gone and the news cycle had moved on, Maple Grove settled into that lesson. And each morning, as the sun caught the fabric and set it glowing, it served as a quiet promise. The flag will stay. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this episode of neighborhood drama, legal twists, and ultimate justice, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps more people find these stories. Your support means the world, and every comment you leave fuels the channel to keep bringing you real-life battles against HOA overreach, outrageous demands, and power-hungry board members. I read every comment, so share your thoughts. And have you ever faced an HOA trying to control something on your property? I'd love to hear your experience. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next big showdown. We post fresh, unbelievable HOA, Karen, and property rights stories every week, the kind you can't stop listening to. And if you really enjoyed this one, share it with a friend or family member who loves a good justice-served moment. Thanks again for being part of this amazing community. Until next time, keep standing your ground. Know your rights and remember, and in the end, the truth always wins.